The conference room fell silent as Dexter Fairmont slid the single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. My equity agreement. The document I'd spent 7 years earning, voided with a single red line. Effective immediately, he said, barely looking up from his country club spreadsheets. Transfer the scheduling infrastructure, all of it. I remained seated, hands folded calmly on the table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting shadows across the faces of the 3 board members who wouldn't meet my eyes. They knew what was happening. They'd signed off on it before I'd even walked through the door. I'm afraid I cannot do that, I said, my voice steady. Dexter's pen stopped mid-calculation. His eyes, cold and calculating behind designer frames, finally lifted to meet mine. Excuse me. The infrastructure you're requesting, I continued, maintaining eye contact. It's not yours to own. If you've ever wondered what happens when corporate greed collides with the systems that actually keep a company running, you're about to find out. Welcome to the Corporate Vault channel, where we uncover the stories that never make it to the official press releases. The moments when everything hangs in the balance, and one decision changes everything. If these stories resonate with you, if you've ever felt undervalued in your own workplace, consider subscribing. We're building a community here, working toward our first milestone of 1,000 people who believe these stories matter. People who understand that behind every corporate decision, there's a human cost. But that comes later. Right now, you need to understand who I am and how I ended up in that conference room, watching my career apparently dissolve in real time. My name is Cade Lawson. At the time this happened, I held the position of Senior Infrastructure Architect at Trident Solutions, a mid-sized logistics software company based in Nashville, Tennessee. On paper, I was employee number 4. In reality, I was the person who built the system that made everything else possible. I didn't come from money. My father ran a small hardware store in Clarksville, and my mother taught elementary school for 32 years. They taught me something that no amount of business school education could match: empathy. Understanding how people actually work, what motivates them, what they need to succeed. That foundation shaped everything I built at Trident, every line of code, every system architecture decision. When you grow up watching your father extend credit to families going through hard times, or your mother staying late to help struggling students, you learn that success isn't just about profit margins. It's about building something that serves people, not just extracts value from them. That philosophy made me invaluable at Trident. It also made me a target. 7 years earlier, Trident Solutions was barely surviving in a cramped office suite above a dental practice. The company consisted of founder Nathan Holbrook, 2 developers who just graduated, and a business model held together with venture capital and optimism. Nathan hired me because I was affordable, fresh out of a state school with a degree in systems engineering and exactly 0 job offers from the big tech companies. I didn't have the pedigree they wanted, but I had something else. I understood how to make complex systems accessible to regular people. Trident's product was workforce scheduling software for the logistics industry. Trucking companies, warehouse operations, distribution centers. The existing software in that space was either prohibitively expensive or impossibly complicated. Nathan saw an opportunity, but the first version of Trident's platform was, to put it generously, rough. I spent my first 6 months rebuilding the entire back-end architecture. Not because Nathan asked me to, but because I could see what it needed to become. The original system could handle maybe 50 concurrent users before everything slowed to a crawl. I redesigned it to scale horizontally, implementing a microservices architecture before that was even the industry standard approach. More importantly, I built it to be maintainable. Clean code, comprehensive documentation, automated testing. All the things that don't show up in DMOS but make the difference between a product that grows and one that collapses under its own weight. By the end of my first year, Trident had landed 3 major clients. By year 2, we'd moved into actual office space and grown to 15 employees. Nathan rewarded my contribution with a promotion to lead developer and a small equity stake. 0.5%, not much, but it was something. Year 3 brought explosive growth. Our client base expanded from regional trucking companies to national logistics operations. The scheduling system I'd built proved capable of handling the load, scaling smoothly as we onboarded larger and larger organizations. Revenue grew from 2 million to 12 million. That was when Dexter Fairmont entered the situation. Nathan had been shopping for a business partner, someone with sales expertise and industry connections to accelerate our growth. Dexter came with an impressive resume listing successful exits from 2 previous logistics companies and a network of potential clients worth tens of millions in revenue. He also came with conditions. He wanted significant equity, a C-level title, and operational control over sales and business development. Nathan, eager to scale faster, agreed to all of it. Dexter Fairmont became Chief Business Officer with a 20% equity stake. I remember the day he joined, walking through the office with the confidence of someone who'd already decided he owned the place. He shook hands, made small talk about our quaint setup, and immediately began making notes on his tablet about what needed to change. "This office culture is too relaxed," he told Nathan within his first week. "We need to project success if we want to attract enterprise clients." Within 3 months, our comfortable workspace transformed. Out went the collaborative open areas and the kitchen where people actually talked to each other. In came assigned seating, strict schedule expectations, and a dress code that felt transplanted from a law firm. "Professional appearance drives professional results," Dexter announced in a company-wide meeting, his eyes scanning the room with barely concealed disdain for our previous casual atmosphere. But he delivered on his promises. His connections brought in enterprise contracts. Trident Solutions expanded to 75 employees, then 120. We opened satellite offices in Atlanta and Charlotte. Revenue crossed 40 million. Nathan was ecstatic. The company he'd started in desperation was becoming a legitimate player in the industry. He promoted Dexter to Chief Operating Officer and expanded his equity to 30%. I should have seen the warning signs. The way Dexter gradually isolated Nathan from day-to-day operations. The restructuring that put Dexter's people into key positions throughout the company. The subtle campaign to minimize the technical team's contributions in favor of the revenue generators in sales. Year 5 at Trident brought a turning point. Our largest competitor, Logistics Prime, approached Nathan about acquisition. The offer was substantial, $250 million, which would have made everyone with equity wealthy beyond our initial dreams. Nathan was tempted. He'd been working 16-hour days for 8 years, and the strain showed. His marriage had deteriorated. His health was suffering. The acquisition represented an exit, a chance to finally rest. But there was a complication. Logistics Prime's due diligence team identified that our core technology was architecturally superior to their existing platform. Their plan wasn't to absorb Trident. It was to gut their own systems and rebuild around our infrastructure. The technical team they sent to evaluate our code base spent 3 days reviewing everything. At the end, their lead architect sat down with me in a conference room and asked a direct question. "How much of this system exists in documentation versus existing in your head?" I'd been thorough with documentation, but any complex system has institutional knowledge that doesn't translate easily to written specs. Design decisions made in response to specific challenges. Optimization strategies developed through trial and error. The reasoning behind architectural choices that seemed obvious once you understood the context. "Most of it is documented," I told him honestly. "But I won't pretend there isn't significant institutional knowledge involved." He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. You built something impressive here. I hope they're compensating you accordingly." They weren't, at least not yet. Nathan had promised that when we raised our next funding round, he'd restructure my equity to reflect my actual contribution. I'd be moved to 5%, maybe more. It was verbal, not written, but I trusted Nathan. The acquisition fell through for unrelated reasons. Logistics Prime's parent company faced regulatory issues that froze their and activity. But the evaluation left me thinking about the question that Architect had asked. How much of Trident's value existed because of systems I'd built and maintained? I raised the equity conversation with Nathan shortly after. He was receptive, agreeing that my contribution had been undercounted. We scheduled a formal review for the following month. That was when Dexter intervened. I don't know exactly what he said to Nathan. Those conversations happened behind closed doors, but Nathan's demeanor toward me changed. Suddenly, my equity review was postponed, then postponed again. The friendly collaboration we'd maintained for 5 years became formal and distant. Meanwhile, Dexter began inserting himself into technical decisions. He attended sprint planning meetings, questioning why features were prioritized certain ways. He challenged architecture decisions, suggesting we should move to cheaper cloud providers or reduce our investment in system reliability. "Users don't care about uptime statistics," he said during one particularly contentious meeting. "They care about new features. We're overinvesting in infrastructure at the expense of innovation." I tried to explain that reliability was our competitive advantage. Our clients chose Trident because our system didn't go down during critical operations. A logistics company managing time-sensitive deliveries couldn't afford scheduling software that crashed during peak hours. Dexter dismissed the argument with a wave. "That's technical thinking. Business is about growth and margins." The technical team was increasingly frustrated. Dexter's cost-cutting mandates were creating problems. We were forced to reduce our cloud infrastructure budget exactly when client load was increasing. System performance began to suffer. Small issues that would have been prevented by proper capacity planning started appearing. I compensated by building more efficiency into the code, optimizing database queries, implementing aggressive caching strategies. Essentially, I was working harder to maintain the same level of service with reduced resources. Then Dexter made his move on the organizational structure. Year 6 began with an announcement. Trident Solutions was restructuring its equity distribution to reflect the current leadership team's contributions. Dexter had convinced Nathan to recapitalize the company, bringing in a new strategic investor who would purchase 40% of Trident for a valuation that made Nathan wealthy on paper. The recapitalization diluted everyone's existing equity. My 0.5% became 0.3%. Nathan assured me this was temporary, that the new funding would accelerate growth and my shares would be worth more despite the dilution. But my promised equity review never materialized. When I pressed Nathan on it, he seemed uncomfortable, even apologetic. "Dexter is concerned about setting precedents," Nathan explained, not meeting my eyes. "If we increase your equity, other early employees will expect similar treatment. The board thinks we need to maintain equity for future executive hires." "I've been here from nearly the beginning," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "I built the system that made all of this growth possible." "I know, Cade, I know," Nathan rubbed his face tiredly. "Let me work on Dexter, give me some time." I gave him time, 6 months, during which Dexter continued his campaign to minimize the technical team's role in the company's success. In board presentations, our achievements were attributed to strong product-market fit and effective sales execution. The infrastructure that made it all possible was treated as a commodity, something any competent developer could maintain. Dexter brought in consultants to evaluate our technology operations. They were a firm he'd worked with before, known for recommending outsourcing and cost reduction. Their assessment, delivered in a glossy presentation, suggested that Trident was overinvesting in senior technical talent. Industry standards suggest that infrastructure maintenance can be handled by mid-level developers at significantly reduced cost, the consultant explained, his voice professionally neutral while describing how to replace me with someone cheaper. I sat in that presentation, watching Dexter nod along, and understood finally what was happening. This wasn't about efficiency or best practices. It was about removing anyone who might challenge Dexter's narrative about who created Trident's value. After the presentation, I requested a private meeting with Nathan. It was time for direct conversation. "Dexter is trying to push me out," I said without preamble. "You see that, right?" Nathan looked pained. He thinks we need to transition to a more scalable technical leadership structure. Scalable meaning someone who won't question his decisions. Someone who doesn't know enough about the system to push back when he makes decisions that compromise it. "That's not fair, Cade." "Isn't it? When was the last time you overruled Dexter on anything?" Nathan didn't have an answer. In the silence, I could see the truth he didn't want to say out loud. Somewhere along the way, Nathan had stopped running his own company. Dexter had taken control through a combination of business success and sheer force of personality. I made a decision in that moment. If I was going to be pushed out, it would be on my terms, not theirs. "Give me the equity we discussed," I said. Put it in writing. 5% vested immediately. In exchange, I'll document every aspect of the system architecture and train whoever you want to take over technical operations. Nathan's expression shifted. Hope, maybe, that I was offering an exit ramp from an increasingly uncomfortable situation. I'll talk to Dexter, he promised. That conversation, I later learned, went very differently than Nathan expected. Dexter refused outright. Not just refused, but responded with a counter-proposal so aggressive it left Nathan stunned. According to what Nathan later told me, Dexter argued that I was already overcompensated, that my equity should be reduced further, and that my role should be eliminated entirely. He's a single point of failure, Dexter had argued. Any competent business removes those. We need his knowledge distributed across the team, then we need to transition him out before he becomes a liability. Nathan, to his credit, didn't immediately agree, but he didn't outright refuse either. Instead, he suggested a compromise. Maintain my current equity, bring in a VP of engineering to oversee technical operations, and transition me to a principal architect role focused on innovation rather than day-to-day infrastructure. It was a demotion dressed up as a lateral move, but I might have accepted it if they'd approached me honestly. Instead, Dexter went a different direction. He began building a case for my termination. Small incidents were documented and inflated. A system outage caused by the infrastructure constraints he'd imposed became failure to maintain reliability standards. My pushback on cost-cutting measures became resistance to business leadership. My thorough documentation practices were reframed as knowledge hoarding. I discovered this when someone from HR accidentally copied me on an email thread about performance improvement plans. The message was quickly recalled, but I'd already read it. Dexter was manufacturing a paper trail. I could have confronted him directly. Instead, I did something more strategic. I began my own documentation project, but not the kind they expected. Every system I'd built at Trident was well documented from a technical perspective, but I'd never documented the authorization and access controls in a certain way. The infrastructure ran on cloud platforms that required administrative credentials. Database systems needed encryption keys. Integration points with client systems required authentication tokens. All of this was managed through a centralized secrets management system, a system I'd built, a system whose master access was controlled by protocols I'd designed. I didn't lock anyone out. That would have been sabotage, and sabotage wasn't my style. But I did ensure that the access control hierarchy was very clearly documented, including the fact that certain critical credentials were encrypted with keys that required multi-party authorization to access. My authorization and Nathan's both required. It was a failsafe I'd implemented years earlier, back when we were a small company, and Nathan wanted to ensure that no single person could accidentally or maliciously compromise critical systems. He'd approved the protocol himself. In the years since, as Trident had grown, that protocol had never been changed. It was buried in our security documentation, technically sound and completely legitimate. It was also, I now realized, the only leverage I had left. 3 weeks after I discovered Dexter's performance improvement plan, I was called into a meeting. Nathan, Dexter, and the company's attorney were waiting. The equity agreement I'd signed 7 years ago sat on the table. Nathan looked miserable. Dexter looked triumphant. "We're making organizational changes," Dexter began, his tone suggesting this was already decided. "Your position is being eliminated. We're offering a severance package of 6 months' salary, contingent on a smooth transition of all responsibilities." "Including my equity?" I asked calmly. "Your equity agreement includes a termination clause," the attorney interjected. "Upon separation from the company, unvested equity is forfeited." "All my equity is vested." "Actually," Dexter said, sliding forward a different document, "the recapitalization we completed during the Year 6 funding round included a provision that reset all equity vesting schedules. You've been on a new 4-year vest since then, which means 3/4 of your equity is currently unvested." I looked at Nathan. He couldn't meet my eyes. They'd restructured my equity without telling me, buried in the legal documents from the recapitalization that I'd signed without fully understanding. It was probably legal, if barely. It was definitely ruthless. So you're terminating my position and taking my equity, I said, keeping my voice level, in exchange for 6 months' salary. It's a generous severance package, Dexter said, clearly pleased with himself. More than required. And you need what from me exactly? Complete transfer of all system credentials, access controls, and administrative functions. We need full documentation of the infrastructure, including all passwords, encryption keys, and security protocols. That was when I smiled, not a warm smile, a smile that made Dexter's expression flicker with uncertainty. I'm afraid I cannot do that, I said calmly. The conference room suddenly felt very cold. Dexter's face flushed red. Excuse me. The infrastructure you're requesting access to, I explained, my voice professionally neutral, is protected by security protocols that require dual authorization. Mine and Nathan's. It's not something I can simply transfer because it's not mine alone to give. It's not yours to own. The attorney leaned forward. Mr. Lawson, withholding company property is... I'm not withholding anything. I'm explaining the technical reality of the security architecture. When we implemented these protocols, they were designed specifically to prevent unauthorized access, even by senior employees. It's actually a best practice in our industry. Dexter turned to Nathan. You approved this. Nathan nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. Years ago, it made sense at the time, two-factor authorization for critical systems. So override it, Dexter demanded. You're the founder, give authorization. It's not quite that simple, I said. The authorization protocol requires both parties to be present and to voluntarily provide their credentials. It's designed to prevent coercion. If either party indicates duress, the system automatically locks down and requires a mandatory cooling-off period before any access can be granted. I could see Dexter's mind working, trying to find an angle. That's absurd. No company operates that way. Actually, many do, especially after high-profile cases of corporate sabotage. The protocol was implemented to protect Trident. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The attorney was scribbling notes furiously. There must be an override, a backdoor. Backdoors are security vulnerabilities. We don't implement vulnerabilities intentionally. Dexter slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. No, I corrected calmly. Extortion would be demanding something in exchange for access. I'm simply explaining the technical limitations of the current security architecture. If you'd like to grant me continued access and employment, I'd be happy to work with Nathan on authorizing any necessary transitions according to proper protocols. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. They could terminate me, but doing so meant losing access to critical systems. They could try to force the issue, but the security protocols I'd built were designed to resist exactly that kind of pressure. Dexter's voice dropped to a threatening register. You're making a serious mistake, Lawson. I built systems designed to protect this company, I replied. They're working as intended. Nathan finally spoke, his voice quiet. Can we table this discussion? I need to consult with our board. The board already approved, Dexter began. I need to consult with the board, Nathan repeated, more firmly than I'd heard him speak in months. About the full implications. Dexter's expression made it clear this wasn't the outcome he'd expected, but he nodded curtly. The meeting adjourned with nothing resolved. I returned to my desk, knowing I'd just declared war. My phone was already filling with calendar invitations, emergency meetings, legal consultations. The company's operations were continuing normally for now, but everyone in leadership was beginning to understand the situation. Trident Solutions' entire infrastructure, the scheduling system serving hundreds of clients, the databases containing years of operational data, the integration points with dozens of third-party systems, all of it ran on architecture that I'd built. Architecture that I couldn't be simply cut out of without consequences. That afternoon, the company's technical operations manager, a capable developer named Russell Hayes, who joined 2 years prior, appeared at my desk. Dexter asked me to reset the administrative credentials on the production systems, he said, his expression apologetic. I tried. The system is requesting a dual authorization that I can't bypass. That's correct, I confirmed. It's working properly. Russell hesitated, then lowered his voice. He's planning to bring in an outside security team, people who specialize in breaking into locked systems. That would be a violation of our client contracts. We guarantee that their data is protected by specific security standards. Intentionally compromising those protections would put the company in breach of dozens of agreements. Russell nodded slowly. That's what I thought. I told him that, but he didn't want to hear it. He paused. For what it's worth, everyone on the technical team knows you built this place. We know what's really happening. After he left, I sat at my desk and considered my options. I hadn't planned this as some grand strategy. The security protocols were legitimate, implemented for real reasons. But now they'd become the only thing preventing Dexter from erasing my contribution and walking away with everything I'd built. The next 72 hours were tense. Dexter did indeed bring in a security consulting firm, specialists in penetration testing and system access recovery. They spent 2 days analyzing the infrastructure before their lead consultant delivered an assessment. I was invited to that meeting, along with Nathan, Dexter, the attorney, and 2 board members who'd flown in specifically to address the situation. The security consultant, a woman named Angela Reeves with 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, laid out her findings with professional detachment. The security architecture implemented here is comprehensive and well-designed. The dual-authorization protocol for critical systems is not a bug, it's a feature. It's implemented correctly according to industry best practices. Can you break it? Dexter asked bluntly. Angela's expression didn't change. We could potentially brute force access to some systems, though it would take considerable time and resources. However, doing so would trigger multiple safeguards that appear designed to protect data integrity. There's a non-trivial risk that forcing access could corrupt critical databases or trigger automated system shutdowns. How much risk? One of the board members asked. I wouldn't recommend it. The person who designed this clearly understood security architecture. They built in consequences for unauthorized access attempts. All eyes turned to me. I kept my expression neutral. Furthermore, Angela continued, your client contracts specify certain security standards. The protocols currently in place meet or exceed those standards. Circumventing them would put you in violation of your contractual obligations. Several of your enterprise clients would have grounds to terminate their agreements. Dexter looked like he wanted to throw something. Instead, he turned to Nathan. This is your company. Order him to provide access. Nathan's response surprised me. Under what employment terms? What? If Cade is still employed here with his equity intact, then we can work together on a proper transition plan. If he's terminated, then I'm not sure what authority I have to order anything. It was the first time Nathan had pushed back against Dexter in my presence in over a year. Something had shifted. One of the board members, an investor named Harold Templeton, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. Let me make sure I understand the situation. We have a senior technical employee who built most of our core infrastructure. That infrastructure is secured by protocols he designed with the founder's approval. We're attempting to terminate this employee and revoke his equity, and we're surprised that there are complications. He's holding the company hostage, Dexter protested. Is he? Harold turned to me. Mr. Lawson, have you made any demands, requested anything in exchange for cooperation? No, sir. I've simply explained the technical realities of the security systems. Have you threatened to lock anyone out of systems or damage any data? Absolutely not. That would be sabotage, which is both unethical and illegal. The systems are functioning normally. All client operations are running without interruption. Harold nodded slowly, then turned to Dexter. So the only reason we're in this situation is because we tried to terminate the person who built our security systems while those security systems were actively protecting us. Is that accurate? Dexter's jaw clenched. He designed this as a trap. Did he, or did he design it to protect the company from exactly this kind of precipitous decision-making? Harold looked at the security consultant. Miss Reeves, in your professional opinion, are these security protocols reasonable? More than reasonable, they're exemplary. I'd recommend them to any of my clients handling sensitive operational data. Harold turned back to Dexter and Nathan. Gentlemen, it seems to me we have 2 options. We can continue trying to force a termination and risk significant operational disruption and client contract violations. Or we can acknowledge that perhaps this decision was made hastily and needs to be reconsidered. The board already voted, Dexter began. The board voted based on incomplete information, Harold interrupted. We weren't informed about these security protocols or the potential consequences of terminating the person who implemented them. I'm calling for a special meeting to reconsider. Nathan, as founder, you retain certain decision-making authority. I strongly suggest you exercise it. The special board meeting took place 3 days later. In the interim, I continued working normally, maintaining systems and supporting the technical team. I didn't gloat or make demands. I simply did my job, which was more powerful than any threat could have been. During those 3 days, something else happened. Members of the technical team began speaking up. Russell Hayes sent an email to Nathan and the board, cossined by 15 other developers, explaining exactly how much institutional knowledge would be lost if I left. Client success managers reported that several major clients had expressed concerns about rumors of technical leadership changes. Most significantly, Angela Reeves submitted a detailed report that went beyond her initial assessment. She'd taken the time to review not just the security protocols, but the entire technical architecture. Her report was glowing, describing Trident's infrastructure as significantly more sophisticated and robust than typical for a company of this size. She specifically noted that the system's architecture was what enabled Trident to scale efficiently while maintaining reliability. She estimated that replacing me would require hiring at least 2 senior engineers, at a combined cost exceeding my current compensation, and that the knowledge transfer would take a minimum of 6 months, with substantial risk of operational issues during the transition. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. I wasn't present for most of it, but Nathan filled me in afterward. Dexter had tried to maintain his position, arguing that no single employee should have the kind of leverage I demonstrated. Harold Templeton countered that the leverage existed because of decisions Dexter had pushed through, decisions to underpay and undervalue technical contributions while inflating sales achievements. The other board members, faced with the reality that terminating me could genuinely damage the company they'd invested in, began asking harder questions. Why had my equity been diluted without clear communication? Why had performance issues been documented without any attempt at remediation or improvement plans? Why had such a significant personnel decision been rushed through without proper analysis of technical dependencies? Nathan, to his credit, acknowledged his failures. He'd allowed Dexter to dominate decision-making. He'd broken promises about equity. He'd undervalued the contributions that made everything else possible. The vote to terminate me was rescinded. Instead, the board authorized Nathan to negotiate a new agreement with me directly. That negotiation took place in a very different conference room, with a very different energy. Just Nathan and me, talking honestly for the first time in over a year. "I'm sorry, Cade," he said simply. "I lost sight of what mattered. Dexter brought in revenue, and I let that blind me to everything else." "What happens with Dexter?" I asked. "His role is being restructured. He'll remain as Chief Revenue Officer, focused exclusively on sales. But operational authority returns to me, with proper checks and balances this time." Nathan slid a document across the table. A new equity agreement. 5% of the company fully vested with anti-dilution protections. A promotion to Chief Technology Officer. A seat on the board. "This is what I should have given you 2 years ago," Nathan said, "if you're willing to stay." I read through the agreement carefully. The terms were fair, genuinely fair. But more important than the specific numbers was what they represented. Recognition of value, acknowledgement of contribution. "I'll stay," I said, "but we need to make changes beyond just my role." "I'm listening." "The technical team has been underfunded and undervalued for too long. We need to invest in infrastructure, expand the team, and rebuild the culture that made Trident work in the early days. And we need to ensure that no single person, including me, ever has the kind of unchecked authority that Dexter accumulated." Nathan nodded. "Agreed. I want you to draft a proposal for technical operations governance. How do we build systems that protect the company without concentrating too much power anywhere?" We spent the next 2 hours talking through ideas, distributed authority, transparent decision-making, investment in documentation and knowledge sharing, building redundancy not by replacing people but by genuinely empowering teams. By the end, we had the outline of a plan that would transform Trident's technical operations. More importantly, we'd rebuilt something that had been damaged: trust. The transition back to stability took time. Dexter remained with the company, but his influence was dramatically reduced. Without operational control, he focused on what he was genuinely good at: selling. And without the pressure to inflate his importance by diminishing others, he was actually more effective. We never became friends. There was too much history, too much resentment on both sides. But we developed a professional working relationship defined by clear boundaries and mutual respect for our separate domains. I used my new authority as CTO to rebuild the technical organization. We hired 3 senior engineers to distribute critical knowledge. I spent 6 months doing nothing but documentation and training, ensuring that the institutional knowledge I carried was transferred to the team. The security protocols that had protected me were gradually replaced with more sophisticated systems that distributed authority across multiple people. Not because the old system was bad, but because the goal was never to maintain personal leverage. It was to protect the company. Trident continued growing. With proper investment in infrastructure, we could scale more efficiently. Client satisfaction improved. System reliability remained industry-leading. Revenue crossed 100 million within 2 years. My equity, now properly structured and protected, became genuinely valuable. When Trident eventually did get acquired, 5 years after the confrontation in that conference room, the exit made everyone with equity wealthy, including me. But the money wasn't the important part. What mattered was the principle, that building things, solving problems, and serving people creates real value. That technical work isn't just a cost center to be minimized, but a foundation that enables everything else. Nathan and I remained close through the acquisition and beyond. Years later, over coffee, he admitted something I'd suspected but never confirmed. The day you explained the security protocols, when you said you couldn't just hand over access, I was terrified, he said. I thought you were going to destroy everything, but then I realized you were just protecting what you'd built. The same way you'd always protected the company, even when we didn't appreciate it. You eventually figured it out, I said. That's what matters. I almost didn't. If Harold hadn't pushed back, if the board had forced the termination through, we would have crashed so hard. But you didn't. You made the right choice when it counted. Nathan shook his head. You made the right choice. You built systems that protected us from our own worst impulses. You could have walked away and let everything collapse. Instead, you kept the systems running and gave us time to come to our senses. He was right, though I'd never quite thought of it that way. The security protocols weren't just about protecting data or preventing unauthorized access. They were about building in space for better decisions, creating friction that forced everyone to slow down and think. The experience at Trident taught me lessons that shaped the rest of my career. I've since served as CTO for 2 other companies and as an advisor to dozens more. The advice I give is always rooted in what I learned during those tense days, when everything hung in the balance. Build systems that serve people, not just profit. Document everything, not to hoard knowledge, but to share it effectively. Create checks and balances that prevent any single person from making catastrophic decisions. Recognize that technical work creates real value, and compensate it accordingly. Most importantly, understand that leverage isn't about control, it's about architecture. When you build systems properly, with the right safeguards and the right values embedded in their design, those systems protect everyone involved. They create space for better decisions. They prevent short-term thinking from destroying long-term value. Dexter taught me something too, though he'd never admit it. He showed me that business success without ethical foundation is fragile. That you can inflate your importance for a while, but eventually reality asserts itself. That the people who actually build things, who solve real problems and create real value, have more power than they often realize. Not power to destroy, but power to protect. Power to insist on being valued properly. Power to walk away from situations that don't serve them. I never wanted to be in a position where I had to use security protocols as leverage. I built those systems for legitimate reasons, to protect Trident from external threats and internal mistakes. But when they ended up protecting me instead, I learned an important lesson. Good architecture serves multiple purposes. It solves the immediate problem and creates resilience for challenges you haven't even imagined yet. Years after the acquisition, I ran into Angela Reeves, the security consultant who'd assessed Trident Systems at a conference. She remembered the engagement immediately. "That was one of the most interesting situations I've encountered," she told me. "Usually, when I'm called in to break into systems, it's because someone genuinely malicious locked everyone out. But your case was different. The systems were working exactly as designed. The problem wasn't technical, it was organizational." "What did you think about the situation?" I asked. "Honestly, I was impressed. You built something elegant that solved multiple problems simultaneously. Security, accountability, protection against hasty decisions. And you did it years before you needed it, which shows remarkable foresight." "Or paranoia," I joked. She smiled. "In security, we call that preparedness." That's perhaps the best summary of the entire experience. Preparedness. Building systems today that protect you tomorrow, making decisions based on principles rather than immediate convenience, understanding that the foundations you lay shape everything that comes after. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. If it resonated with you, if you've experienced similar situations where your contributions were undervalued or your expertise was dismissed, I hope this story provided some validation. The Corporate Vault channel exists to tell these stories. The moments when corporate politics collides with reality, when people who build things have to stand up for their value, when systems and principles matter more than personalities and power plays. If these stories matter to you, if you believe these experiences deserve to be shared, consider subscribing. We're working toward that first milestone of 1,000 subscribers, building a community of people who understand that behind every corporate success story, there are complicated human realities that deserve acknowledgement. The subscribe button is there whenever you're ready. No pressure, just an invitation to be part of this community. My name is Cade Lawson. I was employee number 4 at Trident Solutions. I built systems that changed an industry, and when someone tried to take that away, those systems protected me the same way I'd always protected them. That's the power of building things right. Not just for today, but for every challenge tomorrow might bring. Thank you for listening.